This next section of photosynthesis is going to focus on just the light-dependent reactions. And so our learning target here is learning target 3, where we want to focus on that you will be able to identify the reactants and the products of the light-dependent and light-independent reactions. We're going to focus today, though, on just the light-dependent reactions. So when we talk about the reactants and products, we're talking about what is going into the light-dependent reactions, that's reactants, and what is coming out, that's the products, what is coming out of the light-dependent reactions. Not the whole process of photosynthesis, we're just going to talk about the light-dependent reactions today. We're also going to talk a little bit about how photosynthesis demonstrates both active and passive transport. Remember, active requires energy. Okay. And molecules move from low to high concentration. That means against the gradient. Okay? That's why it requires energy, because it's going from low to high concentration against the gradient. Passive transport, no energy required. Moving from high to low concentration. Meaning with the gradient. That's why we don't need energy for it, okay? So that includes things like osmosis, diffusion, and then a special kind of diffusion called facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion. And remember, that needs a protein channel. But in all three of these, osmosis, diffusion, facilitated diffusion, molecules are moving from high to low concentration, so they don't need any energy. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the light-dependent reactions to see where this is occurring. So the light-dependent reactions are divided into what are called photosystems. And we're actually going to start with photosystem 2. I know that sounds weird, but we're starting with photosystem 2. And the main thing that happens here is it captures and transfers energy. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you're watching and seeing what's happening here. Is we're capturing energy, obviously, from the sunlight, and we're transferring that energy to other molecules. So the first thing that happens here is that chlorophyll absorbs energy from the sunlight. So here we are, remember this is happening. Remember, the light-dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid. So here's the thylakoid membrane. There are chlorophyll molecules embedded in the thylakoid membrane. And remember, surrounding the thylakoid is that liquid stuff called the stroma. So here we have our chlorophyll molecule. So chlorophyll's main job is to absorb sunlight, absorb that energy from the sunlight. Once that happens, there are electrons inside the chlorophyll that get energized, and then they end up leaving the chlorophyll and enter what's called the electron transport chain. That's what this series of proteins are called right here. So anytime you see the little e with a negative sign, that's an electron. Remember, electrons are negatively charged. So they are energized, and now they're going to move down this electron transport chain. The next thing that's happening here is that water molecules split. Well, water is H2O, and so as it's splitting, it's split into oxygen, and then the hydrogen atoms are split further into hydrogen ions, which are positively charged ions. Those basically represent the protons from the hydrogen atom, and electrons. Remember, hydrogen is the very first element in the periodic table of elements, so it's made up of one proton, positively charged proton, 1 electron that's negatively charged. So when those hydrogen atoms split, they become hydrogen ions and electrons. So all three of these, oxygen, hydrogen ions, and electrons, get released when that water molecule splits. The electrons replace those that are lost by chlorophyll. So here you can see, I need to move this up just a little bit more here. You can see here, when the water molecule right here splits, the electrons right here are going to go up and replace those that were lost by chlorophyll. Here are the hydrogen ions that are positively charged. And then here is the oxygen. Okay, now a stable oxygen molecule is O2, so we would actually need 2 water molecules to split in order to get the 2 oxygens we need for the oxygen molecule. But that oxygen gas ultimately gets released through tiny openings in the leaves called stomata. So that gets released. So let's take a look here. Water is coming in, so that makes water reactant. And then oxygen gas is being released, so that makes that a product. Okay? Now, we've talked about what happens to the electrons. They replace those that were lost by chlorophyll. We've talked about that the oxygen gas gets released, so all we're left with now are the hydrogen ions, these right here. So they get pumped into the thylakoid against the gradient. Remember, that means from low to high concentration. So it takes energy to do that. Where does that energy come from? It comes from those electrons right here moving down the electron transport chain. So that energy from these is pumping these hydrogen ions, and there's a lot more than, it almost makes it look like it's equal there, but there's a whole bunch of hydrogen ions in here. So these are being pumped from low to high concentration into the thylakoid. And again, this is a form of active transport. So that is photosystem 2. And then we go to photosystem 1. In this reaction, we again capture energy, but now we're going to produce energy carriers. So we're going to produce those energy carriers. So more chlorophyll molecules absorb more energy from the sunlight. So here you have that sun coming in. Here's your chlorophyll molecule. Again, those electrons get energized. But this time, instead of staying in the electron transport chain, they are going to be added to an electron acceptor called NADP+, and they're going to form an energy carrier called NADPH. So these are energy carriers. Sometimes they're called electron carriers because they accepted that electron and now they're carrying it. So here we have the electrons being added to NADP+, and it's forming NADPH. Now, one way to remember that NADPH is an energy carrier in photosynthesis is just remember photosynthesis starts with pH, and there's a pH in this energy carrier, NADPH. So just remember that. Now, remember all those hydrogen ions that got pumped through into the thylakoid? Here they are. Now they are going to diffuse through a protein channel, okay? And as they do that, they're going from high to low concentration. So that's going to be passive transport. But because they went through a protein channel from high to low, that is called facilitated diffusion, okay? And this whole process sometimes is referred to as chemiosmosis. But we're not done yet. If you go up here, I ran out of room at the bottom, so I'm putting here at the top. There is a protein called ATP synthase, an enzyme called ATP synthase that's in that protein channel that's going to add a phosphate to ADP, forming ATP. So you see that that's happening here. Here's your ADP. Here's your phosphate. Once we add those together, we get to form ATP. And remember, that's an energy storage molecule. So when we look at this, we have two energy storage molecules being made. We have the NADPH and the ATP. Okay, those are the two types of energy storage molecules. And both of those energy carriers are going to be used during the light-independent reactions. Okay, so both NADPH is a product, ATP is a product of the light-dependent reactions, something that's coming out of the light-dependent reactions, especially in this particular photosystem 1.